Once again, we are glad that you're here, and if you spent the break either counting, let me know what number you got to, or maybe you spent the break going back and availing yourself of refreshments. Those will be available after the 7 o'clock hour after this next lecture. As well, there are tables out there with Apologetics Press materials. There are baskets there for people that want to write checks and drop them in there for the cost of the books. Take a look and see what's there. I know that you'll be blessed by that. We're going to have Kyle come this evening and once again and talk to us about the fruit of atheism. I invite you to hear him.
So there was a guy who was on a trip, and he was at the hotel where he was staying, and he got up that morning, and of course there's that free breakfast there, and he's looking over the news there on his iPad, and all of a sudden he hears someone say, "My, those are good-looking shoes you're wearing today." So he looks up, and there's nobody in the little breakfast area except there's the girl at the desk. So he looks over to the girl at the desk, and she doesn't look like she's paying him any attention. So he thinks, I don't know where that came from. Maybe I just heard it. So he goes back to looking at the news on his iPad, and about 10 seconds later, he hears a voice say, "That's a sharp suit you're wearing this morning." He thinks, what is going on? So he looks up, and there's the girl, and he stares at her, and she looks at him. He says, "Did you say anything to me?" She said, "No, I didn't say anything to you." He thinks, I must be going crazy. Well, he goes back, and this time he's not really paying much attention to the news he's reading. And for the third time, he hears some voice say, "Wow, you look like you are a professional." Finally, he looks up. He says, "I know that you said that," to the girl at the desk. She said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I'm hearing this voice." She said, "Well, what's it saying?" He said, "It's just saying all kinds of nice stuff about me, like I'm dressed sharp." And she said, "Oh, no, that wasn't me." She said, "That's the donuts. They're complimentary." Well, I know, but the cookies are complimentary. So if you go back and get some, not only are they free, but maybe they'll tell you how nicely you're dressed. Sorry. We're talking about the fact that ideas have consequences. That if you believe certain things and you act on those beliefs, then your beliefs will determine what you're going to do. And I'll give you an example of this, and it seems humorous until you start thinking about how serious it is. I grew up in a house where if you had a garage door, the way that the automatic garage door opener worked was my dad pulled up to the garage, and whoever was on the right side of the passenger seat automatically got out and walked out of it, because my dad had 3 sons, I have 2 brothers, and so the automatic garage door was one of us getting out, opening the garage door and then closing it. And so I moved into a house when I was, I guess I was probably about 32 or so, 34, and it had a real automatic garage door where when you press the button, it went up, and when you press the button, it went down, and I thought it was amazing. And one time I pressed the button, it went down, and it wouldn't go down. It, like something rolled underneath the door, and it caught some kind of motion, and it went back up, and I thought, wow, this is awesome. This garage door has elevator-like technology. You know how if you put your arm in an elevator door, that it won't smush it. It will detect that your arm is there. And the other day I was telling my son, okay, hey, you can just stick your arm through the elevator door and it won't smush it. And I showed him how it worked. It was neat. But I thought that's the technology for my garage door. And so at the time, my son, I'm going to say he was, 5 maybe. And I was talking to him about it. I was kind of showing him, this is pretty neat to me. And I said, look, you can just crawl right under there. It won't hurt you. It will not smash you at all. In fact, it will detect that you're under there and you're good. Well, what I didn't know was that there's an offset laser about 3 inches from the garage door. So the door comes down here, but the thing that detects the movement is about 3 inches away from the actual door coming down. It's not elevator technology. If you stick your hand under the garage door and you don't get it all the way to that little laser, well, that's not what I believed. I believed that it was elevator technology, so my son was coming under the door, and under the garage door. While I was coming down, I said, yeah, come on through. My wife steps out on the steps and looks at the situation and says, Kyle, what are you doing? I said, oh, don't worry about it. It won't crush. She said, yes, it will. So she about starts panicking, hits the thing, makes it go up. I said, babe, it's got like elevator technology type. It won't hurt it. And then she shows me that, no, it doesn't. I literally almost crushed my kid's head because I thought I had a door that acted like an elevator. I acted on that belief. Now, maybe you believe that your garage door acts like an elevator. Maybe yours does. I doubt it. But what happens when you act on a belief that you think is true? Well, sometimes if the belief is true, good things can happen. If the belief is not true, well, some very serious things could happen. You could crush your 5-year-old's head thinking there's no danger at all here. In the late 1800s, a man by the name of George Walser had a belief. Here was his belief. Atheism is true and it's great for society. And he founded a town on the belief that if people would not focus any of their energy on anything spiritual and they only focused on the here and now, if you assembled a group of people that didn't believe in God, didn't believe in heaven, didn't believe in hell, and all they believed in was this physical planet and this universe, then that would be the best possible society that you could put together. And he started a town, and he named it Liberal, Missouri. This is a picture of the Liberal town sign that I took several years ago. Certainly not in the late 1800s. You know they didn't have color photographs back then. But George Walser, the founder, said people that come to Liberal have to agree that they don't believe in God, that they don't believe in heaven, they don't believe in hell, they don't believe in the devil, they don't believe in anything spiritual. All they believe in is the physical. You cannot be a founding member of Liberal, Missouri unless you do that. And we're going to show the world once and for all that this is the best possible way to live. There's Darwin Drive and Ingersoll Lane, named after some fairly famous unbelievers. Well, here is a copy of the actual article that was posted in the 1885 St. Louis Post-Dispatch that was written by a guy, if I understand it correctly, a member of the Lord's Church, by a man named Clark Braden, who was a traveling preacher and debater, and he wanted to see how liberal was doing. And the title of the article, you can't really read it there, but it says, An Infidel Experiment. And so he walked through Liberal, spent some time there, and just wrote about what he saw. And here's what he said. Liberal is a cesspool of immorality. He said all the hotels are brothels. Everybody gets drunk. Everyone cusses, including all of the children. The society is so poor and bad that people wish they could get out, but the property value has sunk so low that they can't even sell their property. It's no place for any self-respecting person to live, and there's nothing really good about it. But one of the hotel owners didn't take that lightly, his hotel being called a brothel. And so he sued Clark Braden in 1885 approximately for, and I think it was actually that year, for $25,000. And at the time, $25,000 was a very, very large amount of money, and sued him for libel and slander. It quickly became apparent that everything that Clark Braden said about the town was exactly right, was factual, and he had the evidence to back that up. Clark Braden did not have to even appear in court. The case was thrown out, and the man who sued Clark Braden had to pay all of the court cost because he was so exactly right. Now, I went to Lamar, Missouri, and George Walser is not buried in liberal. It's one of the weirdest cemeteries I've ever seen in liberal. All of the founders are buried in a big circle. And in the center of the town, there is a space open that was supposed to be for George Walser. He was going to be buried right in the middle of all of his other fellow unbelievers. But he came in contact with the teachings of Jesus Christ, and he realized that what he'd been doing was absolutely wrong. And when his infidel experiment failed miserably, he said, I don't want to be buried in Liberal, Missouri. I was wrong. And his tomb that you're reading right there is in Lamar, Missouri, about 45 miles outside of Liberal, because he came to his senses after he put into practice a belief that he thought was right that turned out to be absolutely positively wrong, and he changed his mind. What happens when a person thinks there is no God and acts on that idea? Well, before we make that statement, what happens when a person thinks that there is a God and that Jesus Christ is God's Son and acts on that idea? We're not going to spend much time on this because this is not the fruits of Christianity. If it were, we could at great length show the benefits of Christianity to any society. This is from a man who wrote an article titled, Why I'm Not a Christian. I'll show you his article, Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell wrote an article titled, Why I'm Not a Christian. He said, Christianity is not true. There are all kinds of things wrong with it. I would never be a Christian. I would encourage all of you not to be Christians. But if you're just looking at ideas that have been beneficial to society, he says Christianity, as soon as it conquered the state, it put an end to gladiatorial shows, not because they were cruel, but they were idolatrous. The result was to diminish the widespread education in cruelty by which the populace of Roman towns were degraded. It did much to soften the lot of slaves. And, where'd we go? It established charity on a large scale. It inaugurated hospitals. Although the great majority of Christians failed lamentably, in a new form, it passed over modern liberalism and remains the inspiration behind much that is most hopeful in our somber world. What happens when people act like Christians? When they do to others as they want them to do to them? When they let nothing be done through selfish conceit, but in lowliness of mind esteem others better than themselves? And they look out not only for their own interest, but also for the interest of others. What happens when people forgive one another and are tender-hearted, loving as brothers? What happens when people stop stealing, but rather start working with their hands that they may have something to give to him who has need? What happens when people let no corrupt communication come out of their mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers? What happens when we bear each other's burdens? What happens when we follow the teachings of the New Testament? Well, sadly, Bertrand Russell is right. A great many of people who call themselves Christians fail lamentably in it. They don't do it right. People who call themselves Christians but crusaded and killed Muslims to try to take back the Holy Land, they weren't doing it right. People who called themselves Christians and involved themselves in the Salem witch trials, that wasn't Christianity. But what happens when you do follow Christ? Well, just ask yourself this question. What would happen if every person in a congregation of the Lord's church behaved like Jesus Christ? Would you want to live there? Would you want to go to that congregation? If the elders led by example in love, and if the people in the congregation served one another like they were brethren and spiritual family, and if they looked out for each other, is that where you'd want to be a part? Yeah, what would happen if a society did that? Well, that's where you'd want to live. No question, that's where I'd want to live. In fact, what the infidel experiment taught those infidels is that you can hang on to your infidelity in a society where there's some type of Christian leavening agency, but you can't where everybody's an infidel, because at that point, well, if you don't believe there's a God and you believe atheism is true and you believe evolution is true, why in the world are you here and other organisms are not? Well, because you happen to beat them out in the race for survival, and nature is red in tooth and claw, and might makes right, and only the fit survive, and you happen to survive because you're more fit, and so you need to stay fit so you can keep surviving. Well, let's show that as you are dealing with this idea of atheism, the fundamental foundational problem is that if there's no God, if God doesn't exist, let's ask a question. You've got a dog. I don't know if you've got a dog. We've got a little dog at our house. Junie is our dog's name. Junifer is what we call her on a regular basis. I think that's what my daughter named her. It's her dog. And this dog will steal things from the garbage or from the shoe rack or from your plate if you're not looking. We have caught her stealing all kinds of things in our house. Some dogs that live in the wild will not only steal things, but they will beat up or fight some littler dog that has something, and they'll steal the food they've got. Has anybody ever thought we need to prosecute a dog for moral misbehavior? Now, you might understand you need to control dogs, but you don't ever think that dog is immoral. Anybody think that a chimpanzee is immoral? Anybody think that you see, if you come from primordial slime over a multi-million year period, then at what point do morals arrive? You see, according to atheism and the atheistic evolutionary idea, William Provine, who was a professor at Cornell University, who was an atheist, and he was dying of terminal brain cancer, as I understand it, and he just said, this is the implication of atheism. Whether you like it or not, whether you're going to live like this or not, this is what atheism says. And Charles Darwin, he said, understood it perfectly, that no gods worth having exist, that there's no life after death, that there's no ultimate foundation for ethics, and no ultimate meaning in life. He said, if you don't believe there's a God, where would you get the idea that some things are ultimately ethically right and some things are ethically wrong? You can't get that idea. Now, you can say some things are not helpful. You can say some things might hurt society. But you can't say they are wrong, because wrong compared to what? He said, if there's no God, then there are no moral absolutes. There's no foundation for ethics. Now, let's ask ourselves this question. Why have we always valued human life? There's a singular reason why we've always valued human life and why we should always value human life. Because in the beginning, when God created everything, He separated the creation of humanity, and He said, let us make man in our own image according to our own likeness. And then when you read after the flood in Genesis chapter 9, God says, I'm now giving to you every single animal on the planet, and you can eat them. But if you kill a human, then your blood's going to be required of you, because humans are made in the image and likeness of God. Now, the reason we have always valued human life more than any animal life. Now, that's being called into question according to the atheistic idea, and we're seeing people put animals' lives on par with humans' lives, which never should happen, because no animal on the planet is made in the image and likeness of God. But humans are. Now, where do you get ultimate ethical values to say that a human life is worth something? Only, as our founders understood, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with unalienable or inalienable rights. And among those are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, if you're not created in the image and likeness of God, and if you're not endowed by a Creator with a right to life, where does it come from? It doesn't come from anywhere. It certainly doesn't come from the atheistic idea. And as you start looking at this, you don't have to take my word for it. I'm going to show you some of the most respected atheistic evolutionary thinkers who admit this truth. Charles Darwin said, a man who has no assured and ever-present belief in the existence of a personal God or of future existence with retribution and reward can have for his rule of life, as far as I can tell, only to follow the impulses and instincts that seem the best or are the strongest. And that's what he does. Well, why do you do what you do? Well, just felt like it. And nobody can tell me that's wrong because they're just an evolved animal like I am. So you go into a restaurant, you order the 16-ounce T-bone steak. You're starving. You've been working all day. Can't wait for this 16-ounce T-bone to come to you. There's a little bitty old person right next to you. He orders the 16-ounce T-bone steak. You both get your steak. Yours looks like it's a 6-ounce sirloin. His looks like it's the 24-ounce porterhouse. And you walk over to him and you say, look, I ordered a 16-ounce steak. And he said, looks like you didn't get the 16-ounce. You said, well, it looks like you got the 24-ounce. He said, yeah, and he's about to cut into it. You said, give me your steak. He says, no, I'm not giving you my steak. Now, according to Darwin, if there is no God, the way you decide whether you're going to take this guy's steak or not is the impulse or instinct that seems the strongest to you. If you're really hungry and there's nobody there that's going to get you in further trouble, what's stopping you from punching this guy in the face and taking the steak? Well, according to Darwin and the atheistic idea, nothing. Now, if there's a cop there, it might get you in trouble. Your wife might not like you as much. No, that's not what we're asking. Here's what we're asking. Is it morally wrong? Atheism can't answer the question because there's no foundation for ethics according to the atheistic idea. Then Barker said, there are no actions in and of themselves that are always absolutely right or wrong. It depends on the context. You can't name an action that's always absolutely right or wrong. I can think of an exception in every case. Okay, so when I was debating him back in 2009, I watched every debate that he had, every one that I could get my hands on. Several of them I watched 5 or 6 times. In one with a guy by the name of Peter Singer, They were debating the idea of ethics without God. And basically, Barker is saying, hey, there's no real right or wrong. It just determines on the context every time. So a student came up afterward and said to him, hey, would it ever be right to rape a person? It's a pretty tough question, isn't it? He said, well, some of these questions are so outlandish, you couldn't really think of a scenario you've been in where it would be morally right. But yes, under certain circumstances, it would be morally right. He said, like theoretically, if aliens came down and said, we're going to kill all of humanity unless you do this to one person, then yes, it would be your moral obligation to do that. Now, I knew he said that. And here's what I thought in my mind. I thought if we could get him to repeat that and then show the audience how far that would go. So, in our debate, I said, Dan, you've said this in the past. Do you still believe that? He said, yes. I said, what about 2 people? He said, yes. I said, but what about 2,000? He said, yes. I said, what about 2 million? He said, to save all of humanity? Yes, that's what you would need to do. It would be your moral obligation to save humanity. And then I read to him a quote from a German scientist who said they were attempting to save all of humanity by eradicating what they considered to be the disease of the Jewish people. To save all humanity. And I naively thought that if I got one of the leading atheists to stand in public in front of a crowd of, at the time it was about 550 people live, and there was an overflow room where about 300 people had showed up. And if I understood it right, about 100,000 were watching it live. And if I got him to say, this would be morally right, that'd be end game. Okay, all right. We don't need to say anything else. That's it. And yet it wasn't. Because deep down, the atheistic philosophy says, now that'd be fine. If you didn't get caught, or if it would save more people physically, or if you could somehow get an edge to survive further. You see, because atheism can't answer moral questions. They can't really say this is right or wrong. They can say, well, it might work here, it might not work there. There's no foundation. But here's what every single person knows. Here's what we all know deep down. Every one of us knows that some things are morally right and some things are morally wrong. Now, let me tell you, this is the fact that you don't have to take my word for it. This is what these guys are saying. If that's true, there has to be a God. A young lady by the name of Leah Labresco was writing for a group called the Atheistic Portal. And she came out with a blog. She was writing on this blog spot. And she came out and said, this will be my last blog for the Atheistic Portal. And here's why. She said, I've always known that some things are right and some things are wrong. And I started asking my atheistic friends, according to atheism, where would we get that knowledge? How could we come up with that? And they couldn't give her an answer. And she said, I've always understood that we humans are like archaeologists uncovering proper morality, not like architects building our own morality. And she said, atheism cannot answer the question of how I know some things are right and some things are wrong. There has to be a God. And this is the last time I'll ever be writing on this atheistic portal, because I know some things are right and some things are wrong, and without God, that's impossible. Now, as you continue, what you will find is that when this idea is put into practice, and believe you me, it is put into practice. You know, where would you get the idea that you could kill an unborn child and be morally fine with that? That would not be morally objectionable at all? That would be, where would you get that idea? Could you ever get it from the Bible? You couldn't. You could never get that from the Bible. In fact, what the Bible tells you about human life is that from the point of conception, human life is always just as valuable as any other human life. Doesn't matter how smart you are. Doesn't matter how fast you can run. Doesn't matter how physically pretty you are. How physically handsome you are. Guess what? You're valuable because God made you in His image, and that's the end of it. But now if God didn't make you in His image, if you're a product of random blind chance processes over multiplied millions of years, and you're no different from the chimpanzee that might be sitting on the pew next to you, you're just a little smarter. Well, then if a chimpanzee acts a certain way, or if a dog acts a certain way, or if a cat acts a certain way, you know, right now in the United States of America, we kill 3,000 babies approximately every day. Actually, it's right at 2,500. 2,500 babies we kill every single day. Kill 1 million a year. We've killed 55 million in the last 40 years. 50 now. Where do you get the idea that God would ever be okay with that? You know what's interesting to me is when you look in the Old Testament, one of the reasons He was sending the Israelites in to wipe out the Canaanites was because the Canaanites were sacrificing their children to Molech. They were causing their children to go through the fire to Molech, and God said they had shed so much innocent blood that the blood of those innocent children was crying out to Him, and that no land could ever be cleansed of that type of murderous sin and tragedy against innocent people without the death of those people that caused that. And that's why the Israelites were going into Canaan to remove the Canaanites, because they were sending their children through the fire to Molech, burning them alive. Now, do you think that they ever came close to the numbers that are dying in the United States of America every single day? Not even close. Do you know that the Bible uses the same words for a child that's in utero, in its mother's womb, for a child that's outside of its mother's womb? So like when it talks about John the baptizer, when he is inside of Elizabeth and Mary comes and he flips over, that same word is the word that's used for Jesus when He's born lying in a manger. The Bible recognizes zero difference between a child that is born and a child that is in utero from conception. Where would you get the idea that it would be all right to kill unborn children? Charles Darwin, well, you know, there's no fundamental difference between man and the higher mammals in their mental faculties. Barbara Burke, among some animal species, infant killing appears to be a natural practice. Could it be natural for humans too? A trait inherited from our primate ancestors. Charles Darwin noted in The Sin of Man that infanticide has been probably the most important of all checks on population growth throughout most of human history. Several years ago, my dad bought a coon dog. Queen was her name, I think, and she had a better pedigree as long as your arm. I mean, she could find a coon. Now, her problem, if you've ever done any coon hunting, was that she would not stop all night until she found one. And so sometimes that meant she would go 10 miles until she found one, and you had to put a geo-tracker on her, basically. But they were going to, what they thought, have puppies, and the puppies were going to be worth about $1,000 a piece at the time, and that was a lot of money. And so she had 8 puppies, ate them all but one. Next time she had 12, ate every one of them but one. For some reason, she thought she couldn't raise any more puppies than one. What's Barbara Burke saying? Among some animal species, they kill their babies. You know what 10% of the Komodo dragon's diet is? Baby Komodo dragon. Baby Komodo dragons can climb trees and the parents can't. That's why you still have any Komodo dragons. They eat their babies. If you've ever done any pig farming, you know you can't leave that boar pig in there too long. They kill their babies. Well, if you're just an animal and you think you don't have the resources to take care of your offspring, well, according to atheism, what can you do? Dan Barker's got a little CD called The Friendly Atheist Next Door. Now, here's what I want you to understand about this. Are you going to meet people who do not believe in God that would not agree with this kind of thing? Yes, absolutely, you will. Are you going to meet people who are atheists and they would not cuss, they would not steal from you, they would behave morally? Absolutely, positively. Here's what that means. They're not putting their belief into practice. The implication of atheism is there are no moral absolutes. Now, let me ask you a question. You're going to meet a person who calls himself a Christian that cusses. Yeah. You're going to meet a person who calls himself a Christian that's sleeping with his girlfriend or boyfriend. Sure. You're going to meet a person that calls himself a Christian or herself a Christian and is not paying their taxes or stealing from the government. Yeah. What does that mean? That Christianity is wrong and not true? And no. It means they're not putting their beliefs into practice. Don't get me wrong. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that every single person who says, I don't believe in God, is going to act like this. I'm saying that the belief itself is so wrong and dangerous if you put it into practice. This is where it goes. And don't take my word for that. That's these guys who are making that statement. Now, I want you to read this. I don't know if you know Richard Dawkins. He is the leading atheist in the world at the present. He has a little YouTube video with Peter Singer. Peter Singer is supposed to be the world's leading ethicist. Now, an ethicist is a person who is supposed to be able to tell you how to make right and wrong decisions, ethical decisions. Richard Dawkins talks to this guy on this YouTube video and says to Peter Singer, you're the most moral individual that I know. Okay? Now, Peter Singer is an atheist. And here is his statement about ethical decisions as they relate to abortion and unborn children. He says, if we compare a severely defective human infant with a non-human animal, a dog or a pig, for example, we'll often find that non-human to have superior capacities. Now notice this. Only the fact that the defective infant is a member of the species Homo sapiens leads it to be treated differently from the dog or pig. Why do you keep the human alive, but you kill the dog or pig? Well, just because they're human. But then notice the next line. Species membership alone, however, is not morally relevant. We've historically kept humans alive because we've said they've been created in the image and likeness of God. If that's not true, he says, then why would you keep a human alive when a pig could be much more valuable to society? Why would you keep a human alive when a German shepherd could make a great drug dog and this human might be born with mental stuff that would cause them not to be valuable to society? He says, we've always kept the human alive just because they're human. Now watch what he says. If we can put aside the obsolete and erroneous notion of the sanctity of all human life, we might get to start to look at human life as it really is. if we would just start thinking that humans are like all the animals, then we could start treating them like them. Now, like I said, you're not taking my word for that. Nevertheless, the main point is clear. Killing a disabled infant is not morally equivalent to killing a person. Very often it's not wrong at all. Folks, can you believe that the world's leading atheist, Richard Dawkins, says that this man is the most moral man he knows? And he can say killing a disabled infant is not even killing a person. Why? Well, because he doesn't believe in God, and without God there's no foundation for ethics, and without God there's no ultimate value to human life. Don't take my word for that. Now let's listen to the rest of Psalm 14:1. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable things. There is none who does good, no, not one. Now, that's a commentary on what happens when people reject the idea of God and then put that philosophy into practice. And as you continue to look at this, James Rachel says, he taught, as I understand it, at the University of Alabama several years ago now. In his book, Created from Animals, now notice the moral implications. An implication is something that follows logically from a belief. The moral implications of Darwinism. An infant with severe brain damage, even if it survives for many years, it may never learn to speak. Its mental powers may never rise above a primitive level. In fact, its psychological capacities may be markedly inferior to those of a typical rhesus monkey. In that case, moral individualism, atheism, would say there's no reason to prefer its life over the monkey's. You know, if a monkey's going to be more valuable to society, why would you keep the person alive? Why not keep the rhesus monkey alive? And then notice, some unfortunate humans, perhaps because they have suffered brain damage, are not rational agents. What are we to say about them? The natural conclusion, according to the doctrine we're considering, would be that their status is that of mere animals. And perhaps we should go on to conclude that they may be used as non-human animals are used as laboratory subjects or as food. Do you think if the world knew this, that the atheistic higher-ups admit to this truth? Are you hearing what they're saying? Okay, number one, if you're an atheist, you can't believe that there's anything morally right or wrong ultimately. Number two, human life doesn't have any value any more than the slug that you step on. If that slug's helpful, it would be better to keep the slug than the human, because these unfortunate humans that aren't rational agents anymore, they have nothing to say that they're of any value. And, you know, we could just use them like laboratory subjects or food. Where in the world would you ever get an idea like that? Because, see, you'd have to get rid of the whole idea of God and the idea that God created all humans in his image, that he loves every single human, no matter how smart, no matter how tall, no matter how long they've been born or if they're unborn. God loves every single person the same, and that you should value what God values. And one of those things that's the highest priority is human life. One of the highest priorities, ultimately. Continue with me. 2006, a guy by the name of Eric Pianka, he stood before 400 educators in your state as the Distinguished Texas Scientist of the Year. And he said, humans are ruining this planet. They are no better than any other animals. In fact, they're causing the extinction of all kinds of good animals that we should keep. Here's what we need. We need something that will eliminate 90% of the human population. And they asked him, what do you mean? Well, some type of airborne virus. He said like the Ebola virus that would kill people in a few days, but then go where it's not that contagious anymore, and the rest of the 10% of the people that lived could then start back over. Now here's what you would hope. You would hope that the Distinguished Texas Scientist of the Year, who stood up in front of 400 of the most respected scientific educators in the state of Texas, that there would be people out there with a moral compass that would recognize the ridiculous, immoral nature of such a statement. And instead, they gave him a standing ovation. And on the chat boards afterward, the students who were at his particular event said this, because they understood exactly what he said. He was not mincing words. Dr. Pianca's talk at the TAS meeting was mostly of the problems humans are causing as we rapidly proliferate around the globe. He's a radical thinker, that one. I mean, he's basically advocating for the death of all but 10% of the current population, and at the risk of sounding just as radical, I think he's right. Do you wonder why you read about shootings and bombings and you see a disregard for human life across the globe? Because in 1963, in this country, we were told by the Supreme Court that you can't bring the idea of God in front of our children on a regular basis through prayer or Bible reading. And there has been a systematic elimination of the concept of a creator since that time to this, almost 60 years now. And is it any wonder that our young people are being taught, hey, you're just an animal? What's a young person who's taught he's just an animal going to act like? I don't know if you remember Jeffrey Dahmer back in the 90s. He killed 19 young men or boys. 17 of them he was charged with. He was sentenced to over 900 years in prison. They didn't give him the death sentence, although he later felt like he deserved it, as I understand the situation. He was on a 1995 Stone Phillips interview. Stone Phillips asked him, he said, Jeffrey Dahmer, you did terrible stuff to people. Horrible. It would make you literally sick if we were to discuss it in any detail tonight, which we will not. He said, Jeffrey Dahmer, you did terrible things to your fellow humans. Why did you think you could do that? And this is what he said. He said, I always believed in evolution. You can watch the 1995 Stone Phillips video. You can watch him say this. He said, I always believed in evolution, and I believed that we were a product of blind chance processes over millions of years. And he said, I always thought that what one blob of slime did to another blob of slime didn't matter. He listened to what they were teaching him, didn't he? The difference between him and some of them is he put it into practice. Stone Phillips said, when did you change your mind? He looked over at his dad, Lionel Dahmer, who was a member of the church. And he said, Dad, when you sent that creation science material, he said, and when I saw that there is a God, I realized I had done a terrible thing. And if I understand it correctly, and I've done quite a bit of research on it, and I think it's absolutely true, Jeffrey Dahmer, while in prison, went through a Bible correspondence course and had a member of the Lord's church come in and baptize him for the remission of his sins. And not only did he understand that a creator brought value to human life, but he also understood that a creator died for his sins, as bad as they were, and that he cherished the idea that that creator's blood was powerful enough to forgive him of his sins. You value what God values when you know there's a God. When you act like there's not, they're corrupt. They've done abominable things. There's none who does good. No, not one. You know the reason why I've done this for 22 years and travel all over the country and talk to tens of thousands of people every single year is because I am convinced that our young people and we need to be reminded that atheism is not a mere belief that happens to be on the intellectual table, and if you believe it, fine. If you don't, fine. Atheism is a very, very dangerous, false, destructive ideology that when adopted by a society as a whole or an individual singularly can do more damage to that person's life and the people he comes in contact with or to a society's existence than any other belief in the world. And that if you don't found your life and your society on the singular idea, in the beginning, God, then there is no telling the depths of moral depravity that you will sink to. But when you do, understand the truth that God made you in His image, it gives you meaning, it gives you purpose, it gives you value, and you realize what you do here really does matter. Because there's a Creator who designed you and put you here on purpose, and you're not an accident. And He's got a lot riding on you. And are you going to fulfill your Creator's purpose for your life? I think a lot of you have decided to do that by being here tonight. It's thrilling to me to see that so many of you have understood the value of this type of discussion and have said, as an eldership, we want this to be presented to our community because it is so valuable. And as an individual, you sitting here wanting to support it, some of you have been here and you know these things are true, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm maybe encouraging you or helping you see some sides of it that you haven't seen. But some of us might be in here thinking, hey, what is really the difference between believing in God, believing in atheism, etc.? And I hope that what we presented to you this evening helps you to see not only the truthfulness of the idea of a Creator, but the value of what that would do in a person's life if they put it into practice. Tomorrow, we've got some exciting information we're going to be discussing. We're going to be talking about the dinosaurs. Always fun. Where did the dinosaurs fit into creation? How would they fit into the biblical narrative? And what do Christians do with dinosaurs? It's a fun, I think, very exciting discussion. And then we're going to be talking about the age of the earth. Why would you take time to talk about the age of the earth? Well, it just so happens that the research done says that this is one of the pivotal issues in the discussion of evolution and creation. And this issue is one that many people's belief in creation can hinge on. And so we're going to talk about, hey, what about the scientific, biblical, historical evidence for how old the earth is? And that's what we'll be dealing with tomorrow. And I hope that you'll come. We're going to be starting, 6 again tomorrow evening. And I think we'll turn it over to Andy. But I want to say thank you for blessing my life with your presence here this evening. And thank you for letting me be a part of your congregation, your community for this weekend.
Thank you, Kyle, for the lesson. I'm going to ask Kevin here in just a moment to dismiss us in word of prayer. Glad that you've been here this evening. I was going to say what a great lesson that was, but it was really kind of a downer, don't you think? I don't know. You need to find a way to, finish with a joke or something. But the truth of the matter is that if you follow atheism and if you put it into practice, it leaves you with no hope. It leaves you with nothing except for a despairing lifestyle and a despairing outlook on not only yourself, but also the other people that you see on a regular basis. What does it matter what one ball of slime does to another ball of slime? If we want to end with hope this evening, we're going to talk about our God, because our God is the God of hope. Our God is the God who hasn't left us as babes in the woods. He hasn't left us without an understanding of who we are, made in His image, created with His stamp on each one of us, a stamp of the eternal. And it's our souls that we're concerned about, and it's our souls that we're concerned about with regard to the community. And so if you've been blessed, if you've enjoyed being here this evening, I invite you to visit with your friends, visit with your families, offer one more invitation to that person that you've already invited a couple of times, and ask them if they will come back and be with us again tomorrow, again, 6 p.m. We'll begin with this and continue through the 7 o'clock hour, and then, of course, on Sunday morning as well. For those who are interested, there is a lunch tomorrow with Kyle at the Burger Barn, just north of the building here. Good hamburgers, and so if you get a chance to just want to go and sit down, have some good conversation with some members of the church here, as well as with Kyle. That's noon at the Burger Barn. I believe it's Dutch treat, either that or Carrie Dwyer is going to buy everybody's meals. So talk Kerry into that, and I'm sure he'll be glad to do that. Complimentary refreshments. And cookies didn't compliment me when I walked by. Maybe they're just being stubborn, but those are still available, as well as the table with the evidence information on there. Thank you once again for being here this evening. If we can help you in any way as members of the Graber Road congregation, please let us know. Just grab a member by the arm, let us know what your needs are. We'll be glad to do everything in our power to help you with that. Kevin, come and dismiss us. Let's be standing, please.
Almighty God, we are so grateful for this time that we've had to study, to be encouraged, for we know that our hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. Pray that as we go from this place, we're able to reach out to others, to strengthen and encourage them, to invite others to be strengthened as well. Father, we're thankful for your Son. Thankful for the opportunities that we have. We're thankful for the leadership of this congregation for making this happen. We're thankful for Kyle and his efforts and his study and his diligence. Be with us as we go from this place. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.